We have so many questions for you, and I can't imagine what's going through your head as the world shifts again. What was different this time? What happened overnight? And how long's this man going to keep the job?
I think fatigue set in. And what Speaker Johnson had that the other candidates didn't have was kind of a lack of record in leadership positions, right? So I think that is helpful in a lot of ways. And you had mentioned that, you don't create enemies in that time, or you're not forced to make decisions that make some members upset while other members, are happy. So there's a lot about leadership that, kind of erodes some trust or goodwill with certain groups of members. It's a really, really hard job. And so I think ultimately the members were just fatigued. They were ready to move on. They wanted to put a speaker in place and move forward.
But without having those leadership credentials and really the experience of legislating on that level, this would mean that this is a weaker speaker than, say, a Kevin McCarthy or even potentially a Steve Scalise. So why does the conference want someone who does not have the CV?
Well, I think the speaker is obviously an immensely important job, but there's a leadership team around the speaker. And the leadership team that's around Speaker Johnson right now is well established. It's a strong team. Majority Leader Steve Scalise is going to have to step up and play a really significant role, outsized role for a Majority Leader, because the learning curve is steep, really, really steep. And if you're in leadership, you could be in leadership for many years. When you get to the speaker level, you still aren't prepared for a lot of things that kind of fall into your lap. So coming from outside of that orbit in is going to be jarring. But there is a strong leadership team in place around Speaker Johnson to kind of help with that transition.
So tell us what this 51-year-old from Shreveport is in for. You actually know firsthand. He's about to get a massive security detail. He has a bunch of people he needs to hire.
I mean, he's third in line to the president.
Absolutely right. How is his life going to
second.
change? Well, that's true after Kamala.
Yeah.
How does his life change now?
Well, it's going to change completely. It's going to. I mean, his former life is going to be just.
A couple of days ago,
different.
he didn't even know he would be in this position.
That's probably true. Yeah. So I think as Speaker of the House, you're not just second in line to the presidency, but you're in charge of the congressional institution. And so there's staff, there's career staff that you're in charge of, from groundskeeping to architect of the Capitol. So he's going to have to be kind of right up to speed on those type of responsibilities. And there's a big ceremonial aspect of it as well. Now, a lot of that stuff, there's staff around him that I said are career staff, and those things kind of just fall right into place. I think the bigger challenge is going to be the political challenges ahead, and how they're going to navigate a pretty consequential fall. We're all talking about the spending bill or the spending deadline, as we should, but there are still other deadlines, such as Section 702, that's going to expire at the end of the year, which would be a heavy lift for the most experienced speaker. Yeah. So a lot of that kind of institutional stuff, it takes some time, but it's not too difficult, because there is a really, really talented staff that works, in Congress to help transition that through.
When he comes out and he says we can have a continuing resolution to January 15th or April 15th, it says to me that stopgap funding measure that McCarthy put on the floor, that continuing resolution wasn't the real reason why he was ousted.
Right.
It was basically a cover to want to oust him. But when I think of Speaker McCarthy, he was a prolific fundraiser. That is such an important job that people don't really talk about.
Sure.
About having that gavel. Can you see a Mike Johnson bringing in the money so Republicans keep their seats next November?
Well, he's going to have to work really hard to do so. As you mentioned, Speaker McCarthy raised close to $1 billion in the years that he was the leader of congressional Republicans. And those are tremendous, tremendous shoes to fill. And I don't suspect Speaker Johnson will fill them right away. But I think for just as a lot of the country doesn't know who Speaker Johnson is, I think a lot of the donors don't either. So I think it's a good opportunity for him to kind of introduce himself and make that case. He's a cerebral person, and I think once they get to meet him and they hear him, I suspect that they're going to take kindly to his vision and his leadership.
What do you think happens to the motion to vacate? And I'll go back to my first question: how long will he keep the job?
I think they're going to keep the motion to vacate where it is, and
the threshold stays the same.
Sure, but I think going through what the conference just went through, there is zero appetite to do something like that. And again, to your point, Annmarie, that the decision that Matt Gaetz and the 7 others made, it was not a policy decision. It was a decision based on kind of personal grievance. And so I don't, even after however they resolve the spending deadline, Ukraine funding or Israel funding, even if it's not 100%, 90%, or even 80% to what the conservatives' liking is, I think they'll still kind of give him some leeway, and I don't suspect we'll see the motion to vacate triggered.
Like Jim Jordan, this individual is a Trump loyalist. Trump today came out and said, I'm not going to endorse anyone, but I strongly recommend you voting for this person. Sounded like an endorsement to me. Mm-hmm. But what about those 18 Republicans from Biden districts? This is someone who also didn't certify the election. Is this a toxic speaker for them in those districts?
Well, I think from Jordan to Scalise, I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that is going to register into these members' races. I think what's really important is to fund the government, to provide, fund immediate aid to Israel, and then to kind of get the House going again, because I think that's, as you had mentioned, what constituents are asking Congress to do, get back to work. And so I think with the new speaker, it'll unlock kind of this dysfunction that we've had these past several weeks, get the Congress back to work, and then, hit the campaign trail. Like I said, Speaker Johnson is going to have to raise a lot of money to help provide the resources needed for those races.